election coverage, right? It can sometimes feel like we're just watching a scoreboard, not really understanding what's happening in the game.
It's true.
So today we're going deep on this independent article, trying to get beneath the surface of this election, yeah.
Yeah, and one thing that jumped out at me, this article really digs into some of the anxieties Democrats are facing.
Oh, like what?
Well, they talk about how, the polls are tightening and how Harris's media appearances haven't really given her campaign the boost they might have hoped for.
It's interesting they highlight that because this IS, the independent we're talking about, right, which leans pretty left. So it's not like they're coming from a place of wanting to bash the Democrats.
Right, exactly.
But it's got to be making some Democrats nervous, no?
Absolutely. Elections, a lot rides on momentum. And when you see things tightening up like this.
Especially this close to November.
Yeah, and the economy being, well, the economy.
Yeah.
The independent really focuses on that. Voters vote with their wallets.
We'll definitely get to the economy because this article does not pull any punches there.
No, it doesn't.
But first, this whole thing with Harris and guns. She owns guns, right?
Right.
But she's also campaigning on stricter gun control. Seems like a tough balancing act.
It really is. Think about this. Almost 6 in 10 Americans, they say they support stricter laws around guns, right? That's from Pew.
Wow.
So that's a lot of potential voters.
Yeah.
But alienate gun owners and suddenly you're navigating a minefield.
Yeah, that's a tough needle to thread. And what about this whole Biden thing, right? I mean, the article mentions she's sticking by him, even though when he dropped out, his approval ratings weren't exactly through the roof.
It's a classic dilemma. Project loyalty, show stability.
People like what they know, right?
Sure, but risk getting tied to the baggage of the previous administration. Always a gamble.
Especially when people are feeling the pinch. Like with this economy, we keep dancing around. Which, by the way, this independent piece, they basically say the economy is the issue.
They're not wrong. They even cite this poll where voters, get this, they actually trust Trump more to deal with the economy.
Wow.
That's huge. The economy is always up there, often the top issue, especially in those swing states.
Swing states, those being the states that could go either way, right? For anyone who, might be new to this whole thing.
Right.
And speaking of going either way, there's this nervous Democrat donor, they quote, who compares the whole election to a coin toss. I mean, talk about capturing the mood.
It really highlights how unpredictable this all is. All the polls, the experts, we can analyze till we're blue in the face, bud. Voters are going to do what voters do.
Okay, but before we get too deep into the voters themselves, we got to zoom out a bit, right? Look at the bigger picture here, because this election, it's not happening in a vacuum. There are some major forces at play that are influencing everything. And that's what we'll dig into after this. So we've been talking about the Democrats, but this election, it's bigger than just one party, right? This is about, well, where the country is headed next. And this independent article, they really get into that. Like, what are the big issues this time around?
Yeah, and I think they do a good job of connecting those issues back to what people are actually worried about. Take the economy right. It's not just numbers and graphs. It's like, can I afford my groceries? Can I afford gas?
Can I afford rent?
It's real life stuff.
Exactly. And that's what gets people to the polls.
Speaking of things that get people to the polls, this whole gun control debate, it's huge this election. And they mentioned this stat, like almost 6 in 10 Americans, they want stricter gun laws.
Which is a lot. When you really think about it, shows you how important this issue is for people.
But then you've got, well, the other side. Those who are like, hey, my Second Amendment rights, you can't take those away, so it gets complicated fast.
Super complicated. And the article does a good job, I think, of showing how both sides are trying to handle it. Because you want to keep your base happy, right?
Of course.
But you also need those swing voters.
It's all a balancing act.
It really is. And then you throw social media into the mix, right? This whole other layer of like, what information is real? Because this article even they mention a Truth Social post by Trump. And I mean, he goes off on Biden and Harris. It's kind of wild.
It's a lot. And it just shows you how hard it is these days to have a real conversation about the issues. Because it's easy to get pulled into the drama, the outrage, all that. But voters really got to think for themselves, right?
Yeah, it's like you're trying to find a needle in a haystack, but the haystack is on fire and everyone's yelling at you. So with all that said, if our listener, who's probably getting bombarded with election stuff everywhere they look, what should they really be paying attention to these last few weeks? What's going to make or break this thing? It does feel like, I don't know, almost like everyone's holding their breath a little bit, waiting to see what happens.
Yeah.
You know what I thought was interesting about this independent piece, though? It's like, we're so busy trying to figure out who's going to win that we forget what happens after the election.
It's true. And it's easy to lose sight of that when you're caught up in the, like you said, who's ahead, who's behind.
Huh.
But winning, it's just the start. Governing, actually making things happen, that's the real work, no matter who gets the job.
Totally. Like, we're so focused on the race itself, we forget there's this whole other race after the finish line.
Exactly.
So, our listener out there, trying to make sense of this whole thing, what are the big takeaways here? Like, what does it all really mean?
I think the biggest takeaway is, honestly, this thing is far from over. We can look at all the polls, analyze everything,
Yeah.
but it comes down to voters. And what they decide on that day, well, we can't predict that.
It's exciting and terrifying all at the same time, like not knowing. But knowledge is power, as they say.
That's right.
So for someone who wants to be really informed going into these last few weeks, what should they be paying attention to? Like, what are the signs,
I'd say keep an eye on those swing states. Those are going to be key. And how these candidates handle the economy. Because like you said, that's huge for voters.
Yeah, and gun control. That could really get people fired up one way or another. How they deal with that, that's big.
For sure. And The Independent even pointed that out, how important it is to younger voters especially. Gun violence, it's a top concern.
So if our listener, if they walk away remembering just one thing from all of this, what should it be?
Their vote matters.
Mm-hmm.
Really, it does. This election, it's going to shape the future. So get informed, have those conversations, and then vote.
Perfectly said. This isn't about picking a team. It's about our future. This has been great. Thanks for diving into all this with me. And to our listener, thanks for being here with us for this deep dive. Stay curious, stay informed, stay engaged, because, like we said, your voice matters. We'll catch you next time for another deep dive into the topics that matter.
Hit that